So I want you to take a moment, and as you sit here right now, just notice, how do you feel? How do you feel? As you're sitting right there. Close your eyes if you need to. Just kind of notice, how do you feel? All right, now I want you to take a moment and try and notice, how do your seatmates feel? Okay, so the person to the right of you, how does she feel or how does he feel? The person to the left of you, maybe the person in front of you is giving off kind of a funky vibe, right? Person behind you, how do they feel? No touching is necessary. It's an individual sport, okay? Just notice, how do they feel? We're going to come back to this idea of how we feel and how others feel around us and the implications of that in a minute. But I want to open by telling you a story. So several years ago, I was working with a large nonprofit, and this was an amazing nonprofit. They were doing some incredible work in the world. And the CEO had hired a new COO, a new Chief Operating Officer, and they brought her in to really take that nonprofit from where they were to the next level so they could really make a difference. And within 6 months, she had done it. She had added all these new systems and structures. The nonprofit was operating in a way it never had before. And that was awesome. The CEO couldn't have been happier. The board couldn't have been happier. But there was this one little nagging issue. Her team. Her team never seemed to really fully get on board with her as their new leader. And within about 6 months, they're going to HR and they're saying things like, I'm just unhappy. I don't like working here. I'm kind of depressed. And they start using words like, she's kind of got a toxic personality. Okay, so being a curious guy, I went to kind of go check that out. So I go walk over to where her team's sitting in the building. And in their area, they've got this bank of cubes. And I go over, walk over there, and I don't hear anything. So I think to myself, well, they've probably all gone to lunch, but I'll check it out anyway. So I turn the corner, and I look around the corner in the cubes, and they're all hunched around a table. And they're all working on their laptops kind of frantically. They're not talking to each other. They've got these kind of serious, sullen faces as if either somebody died or something smells bad. It's just kind of one of those faces. And I kind of wave to the group, and one person kind of waves to me, but then goes back to the laptop. And I think, all right, so they must have gotten bad news today. So I go over and I knock on the COO's office window, and she invites me in. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I'll see what I've learned. Well, 10 minutes of conversation later, nothing really new has happened. So I leave the office. Here is the most interesting thing in that whole exchange, was how I felt when I left her office. I felt tired. I felt kind of depressed. I wanted to go home and take a nap. I think, in fact, I might have actually gone home and taken a nap. And so it begs this interesting question for us, that when we think about workplace emotions and emotions in the workplace, are emotions contagious? Are emotions contagious in the workplace? And why this is kind of a fascinating topic for us is we'd say, yeah, we get the idea that emotions can rub off on each other, but for some reason we think when we're working, we leave our emotional stuff at the door. Like we come in and we just do work. Whether we're in student teams or going to an office, we just leave it at home or leave it somewhere else. One of my favorite examples of this, I think that illustrates the point really well, is if you've ever seen the movie A League of Their Own. It's based on all-female baseball league of the 1940s. And Tom Hanks is one of the managers of these teams. And at one point, one of his players is crying. And Tom goes over to the player, and he says, there's no crying in baseball. There's no crying in baseball. And I think it really hits this point well that when we think about work, we think, no, we're supposed to leave all the emotions at home. And yet, when we talk about colleagues, we often use words that are emotionally charged. We say, oh, yeah, she's super positive. He's enthusiastic. She's got this great attitude. Or we flip it. We say, oh, he's toxic. She's cancerous. Or my all-time favorite, he's an emotional vampire. Right? He sticks his fangs in you and sucks you till you're dry. So it really begs this question for us. So what's real around this? Are emotions really contagious in the workplace? Well, the really fascinating thing is this has been a growing body of research over the last 20 years studying this phenomenon. And they've labeled it as emotional contagion. Elaine Hatfield, one of the early researchers in this space, actually said, yes, not only are emotions contagious, but what the trigger point for that is mimicking other people's expressions. So you go into a workplace where everyone's kind of frowning, you'll tend to start frowning too. You go into a workplace where people are happy and upbeat, you'll tend to operate that way too. And that's not new for us as human beings. That starts at a very early age. So if we think about the early tests for autism, when an infant is 6 months old, one of the early tests is they put that infant, that child in front of mom, and mom smiles at the baby, If the baby smiles back, we say, oh, things are great, things are good. If the baby looks away or doesn't smile, we say, oh, this could be a sign that they're somewhere on the spectrum. Well, now, if we fast forward, we take our infant, we fast forward several decades later, and she's in a workplace and she's working. Well, emotions can be contagious. It can infect her. And the reality is, we don't know what's happening to us. That's the kicker in all this. It's purely unconscious. In many ways, it's almost like a yawn. So we think about this phenomenon of a yawn. Many of you are probably seeing this right now, yawning. I won't take it personally, okay? We see someone yawn, then we yawn too, and then someone sees that yawn and they yawn too. It's like doing the wave in a stadium, right? In many ways, it's like that emotions, but there's a difference when we talk about this. Because a yawn is a momentary moment in time. We yawn, we move on. But when we get infected by someone else's emotions, it stays with us. We can carry it through that day. We can carry it home to our families. We can carry it into work the next day and infect new people. It operates a lot more like a virus. And it can be infectious. Now, the good news in this is, unlike our normal associations with viruses that they're always bad, when we talk about emotions, it can actually be an okay thing. So researchers James Fowler and Nicholas Christakis, they found in studying people's social networks that when you had friends and colleagues that were happy, when they studied this infectious sense of happiness, when you had friends or colleagues that were happy, you had a 25% higher likelihood of being happy yourself. So we can see that happiness can be infectious in this. And there's lots of different emotions that can infect us. It could be fear or sadness. It could be happiness or joy. Those are all infectious. But there's one that is more infectious than all the rest. And that is negative emotions, negative emotional contagion. This is the most infectious. So someone has a blow up, or they come into work angry or sneering all day long. This can have the biggest impact on us, and it can put almost a wet blanket on everyone who works around that person. All right, so we get this idea that emotions are contagious. Emotions are contagious in the workplace, and that not all emotions are equal. Some are more contagious than others. Plot thickens. Okay? We're not all made the same. We have varying degrees of susceptibility to emotions. Some of us are more susceptible to emotions than others. Some of us are like emotional Teflon. It just kind of rolls right off. Others are very, very sticky to this. So psychologist William Doherty and his team have put together a 15-point emotional contagion scale to help us identify, all right, well, how susceptible to this are we? And it gets even more complicated. Not all workplaces have the same level of emotional richness or emotional stickiness. Some workplaces require what we call higher levels of emotional labor. And what this means is, in that workplace, in that job, you're required to put on a certain emotional mask every day. So we think about our folks who work as waiters or waitresses or servers. They're expected to be happy and positive, regardless of how they feel or regardless of what's happened to them that day. People who work in retail, hospitality hotels, amusement parks, airlines, the same kind of emotional labor. And some jobs, it gets even more difficult because the people we serve just don't feel good. And they feel worse every day. Think about nurses who work in hospice settings. The level of emotional labor is exceptionally high. Okay, so one more piece to this puzzle, so we're kind of rounding out this complexity. Of that system where we work, there's one person who has a greater impact on our emotional well-being than anyone else, and that's the boss. So if this person is coming into work every day sneering, grumpy, unhappy, that's going to put a whole cloud not only over the people who work directly with that person, but that whole culture. However, if that person is positive, upbeat, and optimistic, that can create a more positive kind of light shining through that culture, which again can allow us to infect others. All right, so if we roll all this together, now imagine you're in a job with high levels of emotional labor. You've got to fake it every day. Your boss is like the person behind me, unhappy and kind of cranky. Your coworkers are not particularly thrilled to be there and seem pretty sullen every day. And you're highly susceptible to all of it. Work is going to be pretty tough for you. But that might be just exactly what you need. So let me tell you my story. So when I was 10 years old, my oldest brother, Chris, committed suicide. And that was not only a very difficult time for me and my family, but it was really a kind of turning point for us. Because up until that point, for years, Chris had been putting a lot of negative emotional contagion in my family. He was in and out of jail, actively involved in drugs and alcohol. And so my memories as a little kid was just a lot of yelling and screaming at the nights he was home. My parents yelling and him yelling back. And I remember just being very susceptible to all that. Whether it's my personality or growing up in that, it was very sticky for me. So I remember going up to my room and hiding under my blanket or hiding in my closet just to find a way to get away from that. So about a year after Chris died, I came down with an uncontrollable stutter. I could not speak in public settings at all. So every day before school, and by the way, this was middle school, so middle school is not the best time to have a stutter. I would go into school and I'd practice my B's and my P's. My nightmare was ordering a pepperoni pizza because that never really ever finished. So I went through all that and I made this decision about people. I decided, based on all my history as my brother and my stutter, people were way too messy, way too dysfunctional. I was not going to play. I'm out. So I disconnected from people for pretty much all of high school and all the way through college. Ironically enough, I majored in communications in college. And like most good communication majors, I was unemployed at graduation, wondering what I'm going to do with this degree. And I took a job with a small chain of retail stores. It was family owned, and it was privately held. And so I go to work on my first day of work. My boss greets me at the door, and he says, all right, you're going to be the assistant manager of the store. We're really excited to have you here. Your first task before you get started is to go in the back room. And waiting for you in the back room is the current assistant manager of the store. But he doesn't know you're coming. Your job is to go back there and fire him. And then you get his job. And that was how my boss rolled. So he'd come in and he'd say, you know, Susan up front, I don't like what she's wearing, go fire her. And he created such a level of negative emotional contagion in that workplace that when employees knew he was coming, they would rally together and stage a mass walkout. He'd walk in the door, they'd all walk out the door. And that moment in time for me kind of woke me up. I had a couple of realizations about life, and more particularly my life. First, I realized work should not have to suck. It should be a source of fulfillment and purpose for all of us. It should not be a source of pain, anxiety, depression. We can't choose our families, but we can choose our workplaces. Second, the world needs better leaders and managers. A leader that understands the emotional well-being and health of an organization can create such a wonderful thing, not only for those people who work for him or her, but all their families and their communities as well. And the leader who doesn't understand that or intentionally inflicts pain into a system has the exact opposite effects. And third, I realized my purpose through all this in life. Sometimes pain creates purpose. I realized my purpose is to eliminate all workplace dysfunction everywhere, forever. I had no realization. I did not understand at the time how much job security that was going to provide me. But today, I'm still on that mission. So what about you? If you find yourself in one of these environments, what can you do? Well, there's really three things you can do. So the first thing is, notice your own emotional immune system. How do you feel? When you're with your boss or you're with your colleague or coworkers, how do you feel? Bob Sutton, a faculty member out in Stanford, tells this great story of a consultant who was doing research on what makes a good manager or leader. And the consultant asked what he thought was a throwaway question at the end of his research. He said, when you go meet with your boss in his or her office, how do you feel after you're done? Turns out that's the best indicator of how well a boss performs as a leader. So notice how you feel. If you don't feel good when you're with your boss or when you're with your coworker, try to find ways to limit those interactions. It could be as simple as finding a different route to the bathroom. So notice your own emotional immune system, how you feel. Second, be an emotional booster shot for others. So the goal would be try and be putting into that system the people you work with, whether student project teams or workplace, 3 positive for every 1 negative. That could be smiles, that could be positive compliments, it could be positive feedback, but be an emotional booster shot. The Gottman Institute, which studies marriages and personal relationships around the globe, found in those couples that stay together over long periods of time and have the healthiest relationships, they give each other positive to negative feedback at a ratio of 5 to 1. Studies around high-performing teams have found exactly the same ratio. So while 5 to 1 is our gold standard, shoot for 3 to 1. Be a positive emotional booster shot. And then lastly, next time you go out to dinner and that server comes over to you, look him or her in the face, smile, and say thank you. Because odds are they've had a pretty rough day. Thank you all very much.